The sound of the slap cracked through the banquet hall like a gunshot. For a moment, the chandelier seemed to sway. The silverware clattered faintly on porcelain plates, and 200 pairs of eyes froze on me. My father's hand still hovered in the air, trembling slightly, the sting blazing across my cheek, as if he had branded me in front of every colleague, neighbor, and family member present. I could taste copper at the edge of my lip, a thin ribbon of blood where his wedding ring had cut the skin. It was supposed to be his night, his celebration of 40 years of work, his retirement dinner at the most prestigious hotel in downtown Chicago. But in that instant, the room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to his violence to my humiliation and to the collective gasp that swallowed every conversation in an instant. I heard Margaret, his second wife, my stepmother, let out a short laugh disguised as a cough. Beside her, Vanessa, her daughter, the golden child, the lawyer who had always been paraded as the pride of our blended family, covered her mouth, but not before her smirk flashed for everyone to see. My own 17-year-old daughter Sophia clutched the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles white, her eyes wide with horror. I wanted to tell her not to cry, not to shake, but my voice caught in my throat. I was still reeling from the force of his hand. She provoked me. My father thundered, grabbing the microphone as though to seize control of the narrative before anyone else could breathe. She embarrassed me first. "You all saw it. She has always been this way." His voice, amplified by the speakers, pressed on me harder than the slap itself. The humiliation doubled as his words ricocheted through the hall, rewritten history before it had even cooled. Gaslighting in real time, shaping the story into his version while my face burned red. I wanted to scream to defend myself, but I knew the pattern too well. Every time I had stood up to him in private, he twisted it into evidence of my instability, my jealousy, my supposed bitterness at never measuring up to Vanessa. And now he was doing it in front of 200 witnesses. The weight of decades crashed over me, memories of being locked outside in the snow at 8 years old because I talked back of standing silent at family dinners while Vanessa was toasted for her scholarships and internships, of the countless times Margaret whispered that I was weak, ungrateful, a burden. And still, part of me had come tonight, hoping to prove I could endure with dignity, that maybe for once he would look at me as his daughter instead of his disappointment. That hope shattered with the crack of his hand. The silence that followed was suffocating. Forks hovered in midair, wine glasses tilted but untouched. I could see the guests trying to decide whether to look away politely or watch the drama unfold like a play they had not bought tickets for but could not resist. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo inside my ears. Sophia rose halfway from her chair, trembling. She opened her mouth but closed it again when my father's glare sliced across the room like a knife. I knew that look. It was the look that said obedience or exile, submission or punishment. He had used it on me my entire life. Now he was turning it on my child. Rage flared in me hotter than the sting on my cheek. I could take his abuse I always had, but the thought of Sophia enduring the same fear made my stomach twist. "Sit down," he barked at her, and the room flinched again. His authority wrapped around every syllable like barbed wire. "This is my night. I will not let her ruin it, and I will not let you join her in disgrace." My father raised the microphone higher, towering his shadow stretching across the white linen tablecloths. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. My daughter has always had difficulties, emotional problems. I'm sure you understand." There it was, the public diagnosis, the convenient narrative that turned me into the unstable villain and him into the misunderstood patriarch. Margaret patted his shoulder with mock sympathy, her eyes glittering with victory. Vanessa leaned forward and stage whispered, just loud enough, "She's just a teacher. She was never meant to carry the Carter name." Laughter rippled at the edges of the hall, uncomfortable, forced, but loud enough to slice into me. Just a teacher. The same phrase that had been used to cut me down for years now broadcast through marble walls and chandeliers. My father nodded as though her words were gospel, and then, with deliberate cruelty, he pointed at the door. "Get out!" he commanded, his voice echoing. "You are not my daughter tonight." The words landed heavier than the slap. Not my daughter, not my blood, Not my family. 200 witnesses. My chest tightened, breath shallow. Sophia's chair scraped as she finally stood, tears streaking down her face, but her eyes no longer looked scared, they looked determined. She clutched her phone tighter, her thumb moving quickly across the screen. My father didn't notice, too busy reveling in his control, basking in the illusion that he had silenced me once again. He had no idea the silence was about to break. My name is Olivia Carter. I am 45 years old, and for the past 20 years I have worked as a high school English teacher in Evanston, just north of Chicago. I never became a lawyer like my half-sister Vanessa, never climbed the corporate ladder, never joined the glamorous ranks of high-powered professionals my father loved to show off at cocktail parties. I chose chalkboards and lesson plans novels with underlined passages and teenagers who rolled their eyes until suddenly one day the words I taught them lit up in their faces. I chose the quiet victories, the ones that never make headlines but shape lives nonetheless. To my father, that was weakness. To me, it was purpose. I am also a mother. 17 years ago, I gave birth to my daughter, Sophia. Her father left before her first birthday, vanishing into another state, another life, leaving me with rent I could barely cover, and a baby who clung to me as if I was her entire world. In truth, she became mine. Every decision I made from that moment forward was for her. Every extra shift, every late-night grading session, every dollar saved was to make sure she never felt abandoned, never felt unloved. And yet, even as I built a small but steady life for us, my father's voice never stopped echoing in the background. He called me a failure for choosing teaching over law, a failure for letting a man walk out on me, a failure for daring to live outside his shadow. He called me stubborn when I refused to sign over Grandma's house to Vanessa. He called me bitter when I asked why Margaret's children received gifts while Sophia got nothing but cast-offs. Failure. Bitter. Stubborn. The words clung to me like chains. Still, I carried on. I found joy in my classroom, in the way Sophia's laughter filled our small apartment, in the quiet rituals of Saturday pancakes and late-night study sessions. I told myself I could survive without my father's approval, that his cruelty was just noise, that my real family was the one I had built with my daughter. And most days I believed it, until nights like this, until the slap, the microphone, the crowd, until the reminder that in his eyes I was not a daughter, but an inconvenience, not a legacy, but a stain he longed to scrub out of the Carter family name. Standing there with my cheeks still burning, I realized something. My life had been split into two halves, the years of swallowing his contempt in silence, and this moment, the instant his hand crossed my face in front of everyone. One life had ended, another was about to begin. I didn't know then that Sophia was already preparing to push us into that new life. I only knew that the girl I raised was staring at her grandfather not with fear, but with fire. I grew up in the shadow of a man who believed control was the same as love. My father, Richard Carter, was the kind of man whose voice filled a room before he even stepped inside it. He worked long hours in finance, and when he came home, the rest of us walked on eggshells. If dinner wasn't hot enough, he slammed plates. If homework wasn't perfect, he tore pages in half. When I was 8 years old, I made the mistake of correcting him at the table, saying that the capital of Australia was Canberra, not Sydney. His hand came down hard across my face, and when I cried, he dragged me to the porch and locked the door. I spent 2 hours shivering in the Illinois winter, watching snowflakes settle on the glass while my stepmother Margaret drew the curtains closed. The next morning, when I begged him to promise it wouldn't happen again, he crouched low, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Discipline is love. One day, you'll thank me." That was the first time I understood gaslighting, though I didn't have a word for it then. My mother died when I was 10. By 12, Margaret had moved in, bringing her daughter, Vanessa. Margaret was polished, always put together, always ready with a smile for neighbors, a pie for church potlucks. But behind closed doors, her sweetness rotted into venom. She never raised her voice. Instead, she whispered poison, letting it drip slowly. "Your father worries about you, Olivia. You're too emotional, too sensitive." Not like Vanessa. She said it softly, almost like kindness, until I believed her. Vanessa, 3 years younger than me, learned early how to play the role of golden child. Straight A's, mock trial champion college at Northwestern Law School in New York. At every dinner, every holiday, every photo on the mantle, Vanessa shone while I was blurred out at the edges. When I brought home my own achievements, a poetry contest, a scholarship offer for teaching, my father barely looked up. "Not practical," he muttered. "Not impressive." Margaret nodded along as though he were the oracle of our lives. As I grew older, the punishments shifted from physical blows to psychological chains. When I struggled after my divorce, my father called me irresponsible. When I worked nights at a diner to cover bills, Margaret told relatives I had fallen apart and always needed rescuing. When Sophia was born, Vanessa sent a gift basket filled with law textbooks as a cruel joke. My father chuckled and said, "Maybe this will inspire your daughter to be more than just a teacher's kid." Every time I tried to defend myself, he twisted it. If I raised my voice, I was unstable. If I stayed quiet, I was weak. If I asked questions, I was ungrateful. It was a maze with no exit, every path leading back to his version of reality. That is gaslighting, the slow erosion of your own trust in yourself until you wonder if you are crazy after all. The most bitter betrayal came when Grandma died. She had always been my one safe place, the woman who slipped me cookies under the table, who told me softly, "You are not less, Olivia, you are just different." In her will, she left her modest house to me, a small 2-bedroom place in Evanston. It was nothing grand, but it was stability, something to call mine. My father summoned me to his office and laid out documents. "Sign it over to Vanessa. She needs it more than you." I refused, trembling but firm. His eyes darkened. "If you don't bother calling me your father anymore." I held the pen but couldn't move. Margaret put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing hard, whispering, "Don't be selfish. Think of the family." It was gaslighting dressed as duty. I walked out without signing, but from that day on, my father treated me as though I had already been erased. For years, I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself in small ways, he might see me differently. I invited him to Sophia's school plays. He never came. I sent him photos of my classroom projects. He never replied. Vanessa, meanwhile, sent one email about winning a case, and he printed it, framed it, hung it on his office wall. The hierarchy was clear. Margaret was the strategist, Vanessa the star, and I was the scapegoat. Sophia grew up watching it all. She saw me hold my tongue when Richard made cruel jokes. She saw me smile politely when Margaret announced that Vanessa had bought her second vacation home. She saw the way my father forgot her birthdays, the way he once introduced her to colleagues as Olivia's kid, as if she had no name of her own. I tried to shield her, to explain away his behavior. "That's just how he is," I said. But she saw the truth. Children always do. By the time the retirement dinner invitation came, I already knew what to expect. The card was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Carter, Vanessa, and guest. My name was scribbled at the bottom almost as an afterthought. The seating chart placed me at the back of the hall near the restrooms. Margaret had orchestrated it, I was sure. Vanessa would sit at the head table, glowing in the spotlight, while I would fade into the shadows once again. Still, I told myself I could endure one night for the sake of civility, for the sake of Sophia. I told myself maybe it would be different, maybe he would acknowledge me. That lie carried me into the ballroom, my dress plain but neat, my heart already braced for the inevitable sting of comparison. I didn't know the sting would be literal this time, that his hand would slice across my face before dessert was even served. The invitation said black tie, and so I wore the nicest dress I owned, a navy blue gown I had bought on clearance 5 years earlier for a school fundraiser. I pressed it carefully that morning, pairing it with a simple silver necklace Sophia had given me for Mother's Day. She insisted I looked elegant, though I could see in her eyes she knew I would stand out not for glamour, but for simplicity. Sophia wore a pale pink dress she had saved from her junior prom, and she looked radiant, more grown up than I wanted to admit. As we walked into the hotel ballroom, I felt her hand tighten in mine. She had seen the seating chart earlier, the one mailed to us separately. "Why are we at the back, Mom?" she had asked. I had forced a smile. Because sometimes it's easier to let them think they're winning. The ballroom was everything my father adored: golden chandeliers, white linens, crystal glasses catching the light, and a long stage at the front with a podium engraved with the hotel's crest. A banner stretched across the back wall, celebrating Richard Carter, 40 years of excellence. His colleagues had spared no expense. There were photographers snapping pictures at the entrance, a jazz quartet playing softly near the stage, waiters in black vests circulating with trays of champagne. It was meant to be his crowning moment, his chance to bask in recognition. I could already picture Margaret orchestrating every detail, making sure Vanessa's seat was next to him, that she was positioned perfectly for every photograph. We walked slowly toward our table number 23, so far back it nearly touched the double doors leading to the restrooms. I could smell faint traces of disinfectant drifting out every time a waiter pushed through. The head table gleamed at the opposite end of the room, where Margaret and Vanessa were already seated, glittering in sequins and diamonds. Vanessa's gown was emerald green, cut low at the back, her hair styled in perfect waves. Margaret wore a string of pearls that nearly blinded under the chandeliers. They looked like royalty presiding over a kingdom, and in their eyes, Sophia and I were peasants crashing a coronation. "Just stay calm," I whispered to Sophia as we sat down. She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the head table. I knew she hated seeing them treated as untouchable while we were hidden away. I hated it too, but I had learned long ago that open defiance only fueled their cruelty. I sipped my water, adjusted the napkin on my lap, and told myself I could survive 3 hours. The evening began with speeches. Colleagues praised my father's brilliance, his leadership, his unwavering integrity. Each word felt like a stone thrown at me. I wanted to stand up and shout that integrity does not leave bruises, that leadership does not humiliate a child, that brilliance is not measured by fear. But I stayed silent, clapping politely, feeling Sophia's restless shifting beside me. Dinner was served, steak cooked perfectly, asparagus drizzled with butter, tiny potatoes roasted golden. I cut small bites and chewed without tasting. My father rose halfway through the meal, smiling as the room applauded. He shook hands, kissed Margaret's cheek, raised his glass to Vanessa. He never once glanced toward the back. To the guests, it looked like perfection. To me, it was another performance in a long-running play, where my role was always the invisible one. Still, there was a part of me that had come with hope. I had wrapped a gift for him, a leather-bound notebook embossed with his initials. Inside, I had written a letter about forgiveness, about how I wanted Sophia to know her grandfather not as a tyrant, but as a man who could change. I carried that gift in my bag, heavy with unspoken words. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could present it at the end of the evening and something might shift. But when the MC announced a family presentation, Margaret rose with theatrical flair. She and Vanessa walked to the stage together, carrying a large framed portrait of Richard surrounded by colleagues. The spotlight caught them in gold. Vanessa took the microphone, her voice smooth and professional. She spoke of sacrifice, brilliance and legacy, her tone reverent, her smile practiced. My father's eyes shone with pride. Then Margaret added, "Tonight we celebrate the family that made Richard who he is. His loving wife, his dedicated daughter Vanessa, his true legacy." Applause thundered, and I felt the words stab me like knives. My fork clattered against the plate. Sophia's breath hitched beside me. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me deliberately. My father stood beckoning Vanessa into an embrace. Cameras flashed, champagne glasses lifted, and I felt the walls close in. I gripped the edge of the table nails digging into the linen. It was in that moment, watching them lock arms on stage, that I realized the gift in my bag was not a bridge. It was an anchor, weighing me down in a story that would never change. The announcement came suddenly, as if rehearsed. The MC clapped his hands and declared, "And now a moment for Richard's family to share their personal tributes." I felt Sophia's gaze dart to me, questioning. My pulse quickened. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the chance to hand over my gift, to stand at the podium for 30 seconds and remind my father, remind everyone that I was still here, that I was still his daughter. I rose slowly, clutching the wrapped notebook, my legs trembling, but steady enough to carry me forward. A few heads turned as I made my way toward the stage, but before I could step onto the stairs, Margaret swept in front of me like a curtain closing on a play. Her hand, gloved in white satin, pressed against my arm. "Only family presentations are allowed up here," she whispered sharply, though her microphone caught just enough for the first few rows to hear. "I am family," I replied louder than I intended. Heads turned again. Conversations paused. My father's smile froze. Margaret's lips curled. Not tonight, Olivia. This is Richard's night. Don't embarrass him. I tried to step around her, but my father raised his hand. His voice boomed into the microphone. She's not family tonight. The words cracked louder than any applause. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to inhale sharply. I felt heat rise in my chest. I'm still your daughter, Dad. My voice broke, but carried, and then it happened. His palm slammed across my face harder than when I was 8 years old, harder than I imagined a man of 68 could strike. My head snapped sideways, the gift slipped from my grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. The sting burned into my cheek, and the room erupted in a chorus of gasps, silverware clattering, glasses tipping. For a split second, no one moved. The jazz quartet stopped playing mid-note. A photographer lowered his camera. Every eye was fixed on me on the mark, already reddening across my skin. And then, as if to reclaim control, my father snatched the microphone and thundered, "She provoked me! She has always provoked me! You all know her. Always dramatic, always jealous." The humiliation doubled as his voice echoed through the speakers. He wasn't just striking me physically. He was striking my reputation, my very sanity. Margaret stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder like a queen steadying her king. "Don't take it personally, Richard. She's always had trouble controlling herself." Her words slithered into the room, feeding the narrative. Vanessa's smirk widened. She leaned toward the microphone stage whispering so it carried, "She's just a teacher, Dad, not a Carter legacy." The words sliced sharper than the slap. Just a teacher. I heard a few chuckles ripple through the hall, awkward but loud enough to brand me. A waiter coughed to cover a laugh. Someone muttered pathetic near the back. I wanted the ground to split open and swallow me whole. My father raised the microphone higher. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. My daughter has difficulties, emotional instability. She's been like this her whole life." He gestured toward me like I was an exhibit, not a person. "She doesn't belong on this stage tonight." The words hammered against me harder than his hand. I stood frozen, cheek blazing, eyes stinging. My heart screamed to defend myself, but I knew the trap too well. If I shouted, I would prove him right. If I cried, I would prove him right. Silence was the only weapon I had left, but silence was also surrender. Sophia's chair screeched as she rose. Her voice trembled but rang out, "Stop it!" The word cracked through the room like glass shattering. She stood small but fierce, tears streaming, her phone clutched tight in her hand. For the first time all night, 200 heads turned away from me and toward her. "Sit down!" My father barked at the microphone, amplifying his fury. His glare locked on her, the same glare that had caged me for decades. I saw Sophia's knees shake, but she didn't sit. Her jaw clenched. Her thumb moved across her phone screen. I realized then that this night wasn't just about me anymore. The cycle was about to repeat the same violence, the same humiliation now aimed at my child, and something inside me snapped not in fear but in defiance. I bent down slowly, picked up the notebook from the floor, and hugged it to my chest. My cheek throbbed, my dignity lay in shards at my feet, but as I looked at Sophia, I saw fire in her eyes that I had never been able to sustain in myself. She was not shrinking under his gaze. She was planning. And for the first time in 45 years, I believed the cycle could be broken. Not by me alone, but by the girl who bore my name, who carried my blood, who refused to let him rewrite the truth. Sophia's hands were trembling, but not from fear alone. I could see her thumbs flying across her phone screen faster than I had ever seen her type. She wasn't texting a friend to come get her, and she wasn't searching for a way to escape. She was setting something in motion. I caught a glimpse of the brightness on her screen, a folder labeled Evidence. My breath caught. She had been preparing. My father didn't notice. He was too busy parading his rage, pacing with the microphone, as if the ballroom was his courtroom and every guest his jury. "Forgive her," he boomed. "You know how unstable she has always been. She takes after her mother, fragile, emotional. Not like Vanessa, who inherited my discipline." His words drew a ripple of sympathetic murmurs from the front tables where his colleagues sat nodding as if it were gospel. I wanted to scream that my mother had been gentle, not fragile, kind, not weak. but I stayed silent, my eyes fixed on Sophia. Her chin lifted slowly. She slid the phone into her lap, her finger hovering over a button as though she was holding a detonator. When my father's eyes swept toward her again, she didn't flinch. She stared back, her jaw tight, her shoulders squared. It was the first time I had ever seen someone meet his glare without shrinking. Even Margaret shifted uneasily in her seat, sensing a crack in the performance. I remembered every time Sophia had watched me swallow insults at family dinners every birthday she'd spent waiting for a card that never came every holiday where Vanessa's achievements were toasted while her own went unnoticed. She had absorbed it all, not as resignation, but as fuel. She wasn't broken like me. She was building something. I realized with a jolt that Sophia must have known tonight would end this way. Why else would she have come armed with a folder of files? Why else would her eyes hold that steely determination even as tears streaked down her cheeks? She hadn't just been my daughter, my comfort. She had been watching, calculating, learning how to fight back in ways I never dared. My father sneered at her, barking, "Put that phone away before you regret it!" His voice thundered through the speakers, heavy with threat. The entire hall stiffened, but Sophia didn't move. Instead, she slipped the phone into her pocket with deliberate calm, as if to say, "I'll reveal this when I'm ready, not when you order me." A chill ran down my spine. For decades, I had been cornered, crushed, humiliated. But here was my daughter standing at the very edge of the trap, refusing to step inside. She wasn't just defending me, she was dismantling the game itself. I touched my cheek where the slap still burned, and for the first time that night, the pain dulled beneath a flicker of something else hope. I didn't know exactly what Sophia had planned, but I knew my father's power was beginning to slip. His rage, his gaslighting, his control could not cage her. She was too sharp, too prepared, too unwilling to be silent. And if she was brave enough to hold her ground, then maybe, just maybe, I could find the courage to stand beside her when the time came. The slap should have been enough to silence me, to pin me back into the familiar role of the shamed daughter, the scapegoat. But my father wasn't satisfied with silence. He wanted domination. He held the microphone like a weapon, pacing in front of the head table, his voice swelling with each word. "Ladies and gentlemen, you see what I've endured for 45 years. A daughter who cannot control her emotions, who undermines her family at every turn, who refuses to respect the name Carter." His gaze sliced toward me, his hand pointing like an accusation. She is not my daughter tonight. She forfeited that right when she chose bitterness over loyalty. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, others exchanged wary glances, but no one spoke. That was his power turning silence into complicity. He had done it at every dinner table, every holiday, every private moment that turned into public theater. Margaret rose gracefully from her seat, playing her part. She brushed an invisible speck of dust from his lapel, leaned into the microphone, and cooed, "Richard has sacrificed everything for this family." It breaks his heart that Olivia insists on tearing it apart. She has always been jealous of Vanessa, always looking for ways to make herself the victim. The word victim struck like a dart. It was the label they had tattooed on me my whole life: fragile, dramatic, unworthy. And now, Margaret etched it into the air for all to hear. Vanessa leaned forward, eyes gleaming, and spoke loud enough to carry Dad. "Don't let her ruin this. She's nothing more than a teacher with a failed marriage. She doesn't belong at the head table with us." Laughter, sharp and nervous, flickered through the crowd. I saw one of my father's colleagues glance at me with pity, then quickly look away, unwilling to challenge the script unfolding before them. My father slammed his fist against the podium. "Exactly. She doesn't belong." His words echoed off marble walls, reverberated in the silence that followed. Then, with deliberate cruelty, he gestured toward the exit. "Security, remove her." 2 hotel guards began walking toward me, their eyes apologetic, but their orders clear. The humiliation surged like fire in my veins. To be slapped, called unstable, stripped of my place as his daughter, and now dragged out like a criminal all in one night, all in front of Sophia. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Sophia stepped forward, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Stop!" Her voice cracked but rang out, piercing the hush. She looked so small standing there in her pink dress, but her eyes blazed with a fury that froze the guards mid-step. My father spun toward her, his face twisted with rage. "Sit down, Sophia. This is not your place." His voice dripped with the same venom he had used on me for decades, but she didn't flinch. She took another step, fists clenched, phone in hand. "She has every right to be here," Sophia said louder now. "And so do I." Her voice trembled but did not break. The room gasped again, torn between scandal and spectacle. My father's face darkened. "You don't speak to me like that. You are a child. You will regret this." His threat hung heavy, the same one I had heard all my life now aimed at her. I wanted to rush forward to shield her, to take the blow meant for her, but something in her stance stopped me. She wasn't shrinking. She was standing taller than I had ever dared. Margaret sneered, her voice sugar-coated poison. "See, even her daughter has no respect. It runs in the blood." She shook her head in mock sorrow. "Richard, they are both lost causes." A murmur spread through the hall, guests whispering behind napkins, shifting in their seats. The Carter family legacy was unraveling live, and people couldn't look away. My father raised the microphone higher, his voice booming. "Enough! You will not shame me in front of my colleagues. You will not shame this family. Olivia, you are dismissed. Sophia, sit down, or you'll find yourself dismissed as well." His words thundered like a verdict, but something shifted in the air. Sophia didn't move. She locked eyes with him, unyielding. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her phone high, the screen glowing. The faint click of a button echoed like a countdown. I saw fear flicker across Margaret's face for the first time. Vanessa leaned forward, eyes narrowing. My father faltered mid-sentence, a hitch in his breath betraying a crack in his armor. He realized too late that Sophia wasn't just holding a phone. She was holding power. The guards hesitated, waiting for his command, but the tension in the room had shifted. Guests leaned forward, curiosity replacing compliance. They wanted to see what the girl would do. They wanted to see the empire tremble. My father tried to recover his voice, rising again, but the edges had dulled. "She's bluffing. She has nothing. She's just like her mother, dramatic, pathetic." He spat the words like venom, but his eyes betrayed him. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. And in that uncertainty, I felt something break free inside me. For 45 years, his gaslighting had bound me, convinced me of my weakness. But standing there watching Sophia hold her ground against him, I realized the truth. His power had never been absolute. It only thrived in silence, and silence was ending. Sophia's voice rose above the tense silence, clear and unwavering. "You say I'm just like my mother. Maybe that's the best compliment you've ever given me." Her words hung in the air, electric. The ballroom fell still. Forks clinked against plates, then stopped. Even the servers froze where they stood. My daughter's chest heaved, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes burned steady as she lifted the phone higher. "Do you want to know what's on here?" she asked, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "Do you want to know why I've been recording every time you called Mom unstable? Every time Margaret laughed while you belittled her? Every time Vanessa mocked her in front of us like she didn't exist?" A gasp rippled through the room. People twisted in their seats, craning their necks to see her, to see the glowing phone clutched in her trembling hand. My father's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. He stepped forward, arm outstretched, as if he could snatch the phone away by force. "Give that to me now," he thundered. "No!" Sophia's voice cracked but did not waver. She tapped the screen, and suddenly his own voice boomed through the ballroom speakers, carried by the wireless connection she had prepared. His words, sharp and cruel, filled the room. "She's worthless. A teacher's salary is an embarrassment to the Carter name. If she weren't my daughter, I'd have cut her off years ago." Gasps turned into whispers, whispers into outrage. The mask slipped further as another clip played Margaret's laugh chiming in the background. At least Vanessa knows how to bring honor to this family. Olivia was always destined for failure. Margaret shot up from her chair, face pale. "Turn that off!" she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "This is private. This is manipulation." But Sophia's finger slid again, and another recording played. This time, my father's voice was lower, conspiratorial. "She'll never fight us. She's too weak. As long as she believes she's nothing, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her." The room erupted. Colleagues who had toasted him minutes before now muttered with disgust. A man in the second row shook his head, murmuring, "All these years, and we thought he was a family man." My father lunged toward Sophia, but I moved first. My body, bruised from the slap, still burned with adrenaline. I stepped between them, my arm outstretched. "You will not touch her," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Not tonight. Not ever again." Sophia slipped to my side, pressing the phone into my palm. Her hand was warm, steady. "Mom," she whispered, "play the last one." I didn't know what she had cued. My thumb hovered, then pressed, and there it was, his voice, cold and calculating, recorded just weeks earlier. "When I'm gone, Vanessa gets everything. Olivia will fight it, but we'll paint her as unstable. If necessary, we'll put her in front of a doctor who'll say she's unfit. She won't stand a chance." The crowd erupted in outrage. One woman stood shaking her head. "This is elder abuse in reverse. He planned to strip his own daughter's rights." Another man muttered, "And he wanted to be remembered as a pillar of the community." The guards who had been ordered to remove me stepped back uncertain. No one moved to carry out my father's command anymore. The spell was broken. Sophia raised her chin. "This is who he really is," she said to the room. "The man you all respected, the man you thought was noble. He's nothing more than a bully who hides behind his title and his reputation." My father's chest heaved. He banged his fist against the podium again, but the sound no longer commanded the room. It sounded desperate, hollow. Lies, all of it lies, edited recordings. His eyes darted from guest to guest, searching for support, but found only disgust. Margaret clutched his arm, hissing, "Stop talking!" Vanessa sat frozen, her face pale, the first cracks of doubt spreading across her mask of superiority. I felt the weight of decades lift as the room shifted in my favor. For once, I was not the one shrinking under his glare. I was not the silent victim. I was standing my daughter by my side, our voices joined in truth. Sophia leaned toward the microphone. "Mom, tell them what he did when Grandma left you the house." Her tone was gentle urging. My lips trembled, but I spoke. "He forced me to sign it over, told me I didn't deserve it, told me if I refused, he'd cut me off completely, call me unstable, and everyone would believe him." My voice cracked, but I went on. And I believed him. For years I believed him. Until tonight. The applause was hesitant at first, a smattering of hands from the back, but it grew. Guests who had once applauded his speeches now clapped for my truth, their faces hard with disapproval for the man they had once revered. My father's roar was drowned out. His fists shook, his eyes wild. He grabbed the microphone, his voice ragged. "You ungrateful!" But before he could finish, Sophia stepped forward and unplugged the sound system. His words died mid-sentence, leaving only his ragged breathing echoing in the sudden silence. The balance of power had shifted. For the first time in my life, he wasn't the one controlling the narrative. The silence after Sophia unplugged the microphone felt heavier than thunder. My father stood frozen, his mouth open, mid-curse, his face blotched with rage and fear. For decades, he had dictated every narrative, convinced every room to see the world through his lens. Now stripped of amplification and stripped of allies, he looked suddenly small, just an aging man cornered by the truth. I took the phone back from Sophia and raised my voice so all could hear. "You think these are just words? Just family drama." My hand trembled, but I forced strength into each syllable. "Then let me show you what else he's done." With a swipe, I opened the folder Sophia and I had been compiling for months. Bank statements, property deeds, notarized letters. My daughter's foresight had been sharper than my own. She had known he would try to erase me again. I projected the first document onto the ballroom screen through the hotel's wireless system. Gasps rippled through the audience as his signature appeared beside mine transfer papers from Grandma's house dated the week after her funeral. The memo field scrawled in his handwriting to consolidate family holdings under Richard Carter. My chest tightened. He told me if I didn't sign, he'd have me declared unfit. He told me no one would believe me, and for years I stayed silent, but not anymore. The next file appeared a bank transfer of $150,000 routed from a joint family account to an offshore entity in Margaret's maiden name. Murmurs rose to outrage. One man stood pointing. "That's fraud! That's embezzlement!" Margaret's face drained of color. She grabbed Richard's arm, whispering frantically, but he shoved her off. His mask had slipped completely, now sweat dripping down his temples. Sophia leaned close to me. "Play the video, Mom." My thumb hovered, then tapped. The ballroom screen flickered to life. Grainy but clear, the recording showed my father in his study late at night speaking on the phone. His voice unmistakable. "I don't care if it's illegal. Olivia will never fight back. Push the paperwork through. By the time she realizes the house will be gone and she'll have nothing." The room erupted. Shouts filled the air. Shock, disgust, betrayal. Men who had worked alongside him for 30 years shook their heads in disbelief. Women whispered furiously, some recording with their own phones. Vanessa sprang up, her voice shrill. "This is a setup, you're all being manipulated," but even she sounded unconvinced, her confidence crumbling. I stepped forward, my voice steady now. "This is not a setup. This is the truth you never wanted to see." He built his reputation on lies, on intimidation, on crushing the people closest to him, and tonight his own words prove it. Sophia slipped her arm through mine, her presence anchoring me. "We've already sent copies of all this to the district attorney's office," she announced, "and to the press. Even if you try to destroy our phones, the truth is already out." My father's roar shook the walls. You dare go against me." He lunged toward us, veins bulging at his neck. But before he could take more than 2 steps, uniformed officers entered through the side doors. Gasps swept the hall as badges flashed. "Richard Carter," one officer called. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The room froze, then exploded into whispers. My father staggered back, eyes wide. "No, this is a mistake. I'm Richard Carter. I built this community." He turned to his colleagues, desperation in his voice. Tell them who I am." But no one moved. The very men who had toasted him an hour ago stared at their shoes. Some shook their heads. Not one stepped forward. The officer read the charges: fraud, coercion, financial exploitation, pending investigation into elder abuse. His voice was calm, procedural, but each word was a hammer blow. Margaret wailed, clutching at Richard's sleeve, but the officers pried her off as they cuffed him. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, pale and trembling. The empire had fallen in minutes. As they led him toward the exit, he twisted once more to glare at me. His eyes blazed with hatred, but beneath it flickered something else, fear. "You'll regret this, Olivia. You'll regret crossing me." For the first time in my life, his threats no longer pierced me. I stood tall, Sophia beside me, and said clearly, "No, I'll never regret telling the truth." The room erupted in applause, not polite, not hesitant, but loud and sustained, echoing off the chandeliers. People stood clapping, some even cheering. They weren't applauding my father anymore. They were applauding his downfall, the reclaiming of dignity he had stolen. Tears blurred my vision as I pulled Sophia close. Her voice was a whisper against my ear. "We did it, Mom. He can't hurt us anymore." I kissed her hair, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, grounding myself in the reality of the moment. The nightmare that had defined my life was ending. The man who had convinced me I was powerless was being led away in chains. For the first time in 45 years, I felt free. The applause still echoed in my ears long after the officers escorted my father out of the ballroom in handcuffs. I stood there trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the release of years of pent-up pain. Sophia's hand was still clasped in mine, warm and steady, the one unshakable anchor in a storm that had defined my life since childhood. For decades, I had believed his narrative that I was small, weak, insignificant. But tonight, the world had seen him for who he truly was. In the days that followed, everything moved quickly. Headlines splashed across local and national outlets. Community leader arrested on fraud charges. Beloved educator vindicated after years of abuse. Reporters camped outside my school, shoving microphones in my face, begging for quotes. For once, I wasn't ashamed to speak. I told the truth calmly, factually, with my daughter by my side. Every word felt like a stone placed back into the foundation of a life he had tried to dismantle. The district attorney pressed charges within a week. Fraud, coercion, financial exploitation felonies that carried real weight. Investigators uncovered more than we had even realized. Offshore accounts in Margaret's name, forged medical notes suggesting I was unstable, and attempted power of attorney documents that would have stripped me of autonomy. He hadn't just wanted to erase me emotionally. He had been preparing to erase me legally to reduce me to nothing. Margaret tried to spin the narrative. She claimed she was an unwitting participant that Richard had manipulated her. But the bank trails told another story, and soon she too faced charges of conspiracy. Vanessa vanished from the public eye, her once sparkling career in law firms suddenly radioactive. Word spread that she had been dropped by her firm. No client wanted to be associated with a name tied to such scandal. The trial came 3 months later. I sat in the courtroom, heart-pounding, as my father shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled. He scanned the gallery searching for support, but found none. Even his oldest colleagues had abandoned him. When our eyes met, I expected to feel fear. Instead, I felt only pity for a man who had spent his life chasing control and ended up stripped of everything. The prosecution played Sophia's recordings. His voice, cold and arrogant, filled the courtroom just as it had the ballroom that night. I watched jurors' faces tighten with disgust. My testimony followed. I spoke plainly, recounting the years of gaslighting, the threats, the coercion. For the first time, my voice did not shake under his glare. Sophia testified too. My daughter, only 19, stood taller than I had ever seen her. She told them why she had started recording, how she couldn't stand to see her mother silenced any longer. The jury hung on her every word. It took them less than 4 hours to return with a verdict guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in state prison with no chance of early parole for the first 8. Margaret's plea deal earned her 3 years suspended if she cooperated with restitution. Vanessa walked free, but ruined her reputation in tatters. The day of sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse and felt sunlight warm my face. For the first time, the weight pressing on my chest was gone. Reporters swarmed microphones, raised cameras flashing. "How does it feel?" they asked. I answered with the simplest truth. It feels like freedom. But freedom was not just his punishment, it was rebuilding. I went back to teaching my students, greeting me with wide eyes and shy hugs. Parents thanked me for standing up, for showing their children that even in the face of cruelty, truth can prevail. Sophia enrolled in a journalism program determined to fight for stories like ours, stories too often buried by power and fear. We moved into a small but bright house near campus. It wasn't lavish, but it was ours, no signatures stolen, no threats looming over us. I planted a garden in the backyard, hands deep in the soil. Each seed I pressed into the earth felt like a promised growth, renewal, life continuing despite scars. At night, Sophia and I sat on the porch swing sipping tea, sometimes silent, sometimes laughing until tears rolled down our cheeks. She would lean her head on my shoulder and I would think, this is what family is meant to be. Not power, not control, not fear. Just love, safety, and truth. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Prison stationery. His handwriting. My hands shook as I held it, but curiosity won. Inside, just 4 words: "You destroyed our legacy." I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and set it in the fireplace. Flames licked it into ash. For once, I didn't feel compelled to respond or justify. His legacy was never mine to carry. Instead, I built my own. With Sophia, with my students, with the quiet satisfaction of a life finally lived on my terms. Months later, standing at a community fundraiser, the mayor introduced me not as Richard Carter's daughter, but as Olivia Carter, the teacher who fought back and won. The applause was for me this time, genuine, thunderous, affirming. As I looked out over the crowd, I caught Sophia's proud smile. My chest swelled, not with the old ache of invisibility, but with joy, the kind that roots deep and holds firm. And in that moment, I knew the true moral of my story. Blood does not define family. Actions do. Respect does. Truth does. My father once told me I was nothing, but standing there alive, free and loved, I realized I was everything he could never be.